that there were 10 different people putting together who wrote the Psalms. But David HaMelech is the one who really compiled the whole thing. 150 chapters. And by the way, 150 chapters, it's about 2,800 verses. 2,800 verses in Tehillim, which is broken down, by the way, into 5 books. Also, parallel to the 5 books of the Chumash. So we have the 5 books of Tehillim. So that's all broken down parallel to each other. 2,800 verses, that's close to half of what we have in the Torah, the verses in the Torah. So it's just an interesting concept. So a little bit about the compiler, David HaMelech, which I think if you know this, great. If you don't know this, you'll be a little bit in shock. So let's go back. Where did David come from? On the holiday of Shavuos, many people have a custom to read the story of Ruth. Ruth was a Moabite woman. Ruth was a Moabite woman. She converted. A gentleman by the name of Boaz married Ruth. They had a son by the name of Oved. Ruth and Boaz had Oved. Oved had a son by the name of Yishai. And Yishai had a son by the name of David. Okay, so actually David HaMelech, his great-grandmother was a convert. And not only a convert, a Moabite convert. And who came out of there? Out of her, who emanated out of her? The greatest of the kings, David HaMelech. Ruth was the greatest source of inspiration for David HaMelech's writing Tehillim. It was Ruth, his great-grandmother, who was his inspiration. Not only was she his great inspiration, his great-grandmother, but Ruth was so great that she merited to have the nachas of her, not great-grandson, but even her great-great-grandson, who was King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech. And she witnessed, if you remember the story with Shlomo HaMelech, that 2 mothers came with a baby, the baby's mine. And Shlomo HaMelech said, cut the baby in half. So the one mother, the mother who really wasn't the real mother, said, okay, fair deal. And the real mother wouldn't allow it. She broke down in tears. If you remember that story, Ruth merited to see this whole incident. And after she saw this incident, she said how great she felt, how much nachas she felt, and she realizes now what she's leaving, and soon after that she died. She felt once she saw this whole incident with her descendants, her great-great-grandchild, right? She felt like $1 million, and she felt that's it. She lived her life. Not only that, the Gemara tells us that in the courtyard of the temple of the Beis HaMikdash, no one was allowed to sit there. No one was allowed to sit there except there was a throne there for Malchus Beis David. All of the descendants of David HaMelech, which David HaMelech, obviously, he did not get to build it, so he did not merit it, but his descendant, Shlomo HaMelech, there was a throne for him, and he was the only one to show the great sovereignty of the family of David. But it also says there was one other throne over there for one other person, and the Gemara tells us it was for the Ima Shel Malchus, the mother of the whole kingdom, and that was for Ruth. So Ruth merited, even she was Imagine, she was a Moabite woman. She converted to Judaism, and she reached such a level. Not only did she have David HaMelech come out of her, but she merited the greatness to have a seat, and the only other one next to the king in the courtyard of the temple. So that's how great Ruth was, and now we understand also why she was such a great inspiration to King David. His father Yishai was a very great person, was a Talmid Chacham and great. But guess what? He ostracized his son David HaMelech. Yishai not only ostracized David HaMelech, not only did he not have a relationship with his son David HaMelech. David HaMelech, by the way, we think of King David as the greatest and everything. He had a very rough childhood. And not only did he have a rough youth, in today's day and age, he would be fit for therapy. No jokes. That's how bad it was. He had a very rough childhood, which I'll speak about in 2 minutes. But imagine you have a father, and he says, not only, I don't want to have anything to do with you, he takes you, who you're the youngest of another 7 brothers, you're 8 brothers together, 8 siblings altogether. He takes you from the 8, and he makes everyone into great people and sends them to great positions. And he takes David HaMelech, and you know what he does with King David? He sends him to the field, to the shepherds. Go away to the animals. You stay with the animals. You're only good to be a shepherd. That's it. Which I'll get to this very soon. What was the problem with King David? Now, let's remember one thing. Yishai was a very great person. But he was very meticulous in his mitzvos, in his holiness, that the Torah says, Lo yavo mo'avi va'amoni b'kal Hashem. We learned this in one of our last classes in Talmud, that anyone from Moab and Ammon, those 2 nations, should not marry into the Jewish nation. Okay, and that's why, if you remember, we learned that when Moab came into the temple, what did they do? They attacked the Torahs, and they burned them. That was our last class. Why did they burn the Torahs? Because the Torah, they wanted to take revenge on the Torah, who said, well, you can't have a Moabite person marry into the nation of God. But we had a problem. We always had it clear that a Moabite male cannot marry into the nation of God. What is the law with a Moabite woman? So there was forever a great debate and the rabbis. Is a Moabite woman allowed to or not? We have tradition from all the way back that a Moabite woman is allowed to marry into the nation of God. A Moabite woman, not a man. Yishai was of a different opinion. And Yishai got into his head that, wait a minute, who do I come from? I come from Oved, who came from Boaz, who married Ruth. My grandmother was Ruth, who was a convert from a Moabite. She was a Moabite woman. And therefore my child David might be, get it, illegitimate. And therefore, he ostracized him. Now, once he got this bug into his head, guess what he did? He decided I wasn't allowed to really marry Netzevet. He separated from her. And now his kid is illegitimate, he held. So that's why he couldn't have a relationship with David HaMelech. Doesn't take away from his holiness and his greatness, but he had that in mind. So David HaMelech was not only ostracized by his father, he was also ostracized by his brothers. He was ostracized by all his 7 brothers. And even in one of his Tehillims, one of his chapters in Psalms, he says, Muzar ayisi la'achai, I was strange to all my brothers. I was strange to them. Why? They had nothing to do with me. Now imagine, Yishai, when Yishai would give a lecture, imagine, Yishai was so great, when he would give a lecture, everyone followed him. Everyone. So he had a relationship with everyone except his own son. Crazy. A crazy thought. It's like you're a great Rabbi, a great teacher to your students, but a lousy father, something like that. Do you have that? I mean, Yishai had his reasons. No one's saying his reasons were right. I'm not condoning the reasons. But that was Yishai. So David HaMelech basically grew up without a father figure. Not only did he grow up without a father figure, he grew up without a male figure. The women in his life, his grandmother, his great-grandmother, even going back, further back, they were great. But David HaMelech was ostracized. So his whole life was where? In the fields. And that's where he grew to be so close with God. That's where he was all his inspiration to say Tehillim. That's where he got so close. That's where he became a Talmid Chacham, a great sage. Why? He was alone. You know, when you're alone, you think, you meditate. You do all these crazy things. And that's how he earned all his greatness. And what was his great... And by the way, this rough youth was till his late 20s. Now imagine, David HaMelech also wasn't only ostracized by his father. David HaMelech, besides being so great and having so many chassidim, so many followers, he also had tons of enemies. One great enemy that he had was, as I told you, his father, his brothers. Guess who else was an enemy of his? We all hear about stories from a mother-in-law, right? Mother-in-law's stories. All jokes aside, you know, you have problems with your mother-in-law. His father-in-law hated him. His father-in-law wanted him dead. Who was his father-in-law? Anyone know? Oh. Say that again. King Saul. Shaul HaMelech was his father-in-law. Beautiful, Richie. And he wanted him gone. So imagine you grow up, no father figure. You grow up, no brothers in your life. You grow up, you get married, your father-in-law hates your guts. Right? It's not the mother-in-law this time. It's the father-in-law hates your guts. Now you have children. Now you have a son who's running after you to kill you. You have to run from him. Avshalom. Wanted to kill him. So he had lots of enemies, and not only did he have lots of enemies, he fought, the Gemara tells us, the Talmud tells us, he fought 18 different wars. He fought 18 different wars. So he did not have it easy. But he was a great warrior. Don't forget, he had an enemy by the name of Goliath. In English, it's Goliath. He had a lot of enemies, and he fought a lot of wars, and he won them all. But he was always on the run. But it's because of his being ostracized, he gained that theme in his whole life, which was loving Hashem. His love for Hashem was great. Question, my friends, is why did David HaMelech love Hashem? Why did he have such great love? God, most people will say, God dealt me a rough deal in my life. The heck with everything. What do I need God in my life for? And yet, God dealt him this deck of cards. And look at him. He loved God. Why? As follows. So how does a pearl become a pearl? So there's an oyster or a clam, right? And they get in themselves a little dirt. Parasite, as a defense mechanism, it sheds a certain liquid. And that clam or oyster sheds layers and layers of liquid to protect it because it becomes irritated. And that's how the pearl becomes from that liquid. That's how a pearl becomes what it is. And it comes out to be so expensive, so precious. A precious stone. So what do we see from this? From the irritation comes the pearl. From that irritation, from that suffering, came something precious. From David HaMelech's suffering came his great love for God, came his greatness. Today in our world, no one wants to suffer. No one wants to, forget about suffering, no one wants to be uncomfortable. And when we get a little uncomfortable, we go crazy. We are so into our own comfort, into our own selfishness, we're scared to be uncomfortable. So all we need is, give me my beer, let me watch my game, let me sit in front of the big screen, and let me enjoy life. And if a little discomfort comes into my life, I go crazy. So I have to pacify it. There's nothing wrong with having a little discomfort in life. And maybe that's the problem with today's day and age, that everyone's too comfortable, that they forget, they love this world so much, they forget about loving what really counts. And that's why David HaMelech became so great. Because of his suffering, because of all his irritation, he became who he was. And I'm going to conclude with today's class with something that's really crazy. So David HaMelech had wives. More than one wife. Remember, Yavamis, we learned you can have more. In those days, you were able to have more than one wife. And in those days, not only did they have wives, they also had concubines. David HaMelech, King David, he had 18 wives, besides having other concubines. Most of us have problems handling one wife. He had 18 wives. The question the rabbis ask is, what did he need 18 wives for? And the answer the rabbis give is as follows. You'll be blown away by this answer. Every one of us have inside of us many talents. Our talents cannot be developed to the fullest degree without our wives. It's the wives who bring out all of our talents. David HaMelech, say our rabbis, had so many different talents. First thing David HaMelech is known as, he was a warrior. A warrior is tough. We view a warrior as tough, rough, mean sometimes. At the same time, he was a musician. He was a very fine, delicate musician. At the same time, he was a leader. At the same time, he was a poet. At the same time, he was a diplomat. At the same time, he was an author. At the same time, he was a parent. And every one of his wives brought out every one of his talents to their fullest. And that's how David HaMelech reached to be David HaMelech. Say our sages, and with this I'll conclude. The wives are so great that they bring out all the talents of the husband. And without a wife, our talents cannot be developed completely. It's an unbelievable concept, which many people don't understand how our rabbis, not of today, of the old ages of yesteryear, they had the greatest derech eretz for their wives, the greatest respect that us in today's day and age can never reach, having that respect for our wives. They held the wives on such a high plateau that they said that without the wives, without the women in our lives, our wives, we can't reach our talents to its full capacity. In Mirz Hashem, next week we will continue our introduction, part 2, to David HaMelech and to Tehillim. But this is how David HaMelech has started off and reached his greatness, so on and so forth. I wish everyone a great day, a great week, and only may the good news be yours. Only all the best to everyone.